The smell of industrial bleach is usually strong enough to mask anything, even the scent of fear. But it couldn't hide the metallic tang of freezing rain and gun oil that just walked through the front doors of the Hanbaiol preschool. I gripped my mop handle, and for the first time in 5 years, the ghost inside me woke up. I was supposed to be invisible. That was the rule. I was Kyra, the woman who scrubbed the toilets, the woman who emptied the trash, the woman drowning in $200,000 of medical debt left behind by a husband who died anyway. I was a gray smudge in the background of the lives of Seoul's elite. The preschool was mostly empty. The other children had been whisked away by nannies in imported sedans hours ago, fleeing the torrential downpour that had turned the Gangnam streets into rivers. Only one child remained, Seola. She sat in the corner of the reading nook, a tiny porcelain doll with eyes too old for her 5 years. She didn't play. She didn't color. She just stared at the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The teachers whispered about her, the mute daughter of Kim Hyun-woo, the broken princess. I was 10 feet away, wringing out my mop into the yellow bucket, when the front glass shattered. It wasn't the wind. 3 men stepped through the broken frame. They wore tactical gear disguised as heavy raincoats, but the way they moved, efficient, scanning, predatory, gave them away instantly. They weren't burglars. They were extraction. "Target located," the lead man said. His voice was muffled by a black mask. He raised a silenced pistol, sweeping the room until the barrel settled on the terrified teacher cowering behind the desk. "Grab the girl. Leave no witnesses." The teacher screamed. Seola didn't make a sound. She just curled into a tighter ball, trembling. My heart didn't race. It slowed down. The world sharpened into high-definition clarity. The debt, the grief, the exhaustion of working 3 jobs, it all vanished. The janitor was gone. I stepped out from the shadows of the utility closet. The point man turned toward the movement, his gun swinging my way. Janitor. Down. Now. I didn't go down. I stepped forward, putting my weight into my hips. I swung the heavy, wet mop head with the precision of a flail. The thick, gray strands slapped across his face, blinding him with dirty water and bleach. But it was the solid wood of the handle that did the damage. I followed the arc, driving the end of the stick into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs with a wet wheeze, and he folded. "Welcome back, my dangerous dreamers. I hope you're all recovering from the holiday chaos, surrounded by wrapping paper and leftovers. Today is Boxing Day, a day for unboxing gifts. But in this story, we aren't unboxing toys or sweaters. We are unboxing the darkest secrets of Seoul's underworld. If you're watching this from the comfort of your couch, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's unwrap this mystery together. Grab your tea, get cozy, and let's see what happens when a struggling widow pushes a mafia boss too far. Let's begin. The first man hit the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The other 2 froze for a microsecond. They were expecting a screaming civilian, not a combatant. That microsecond was all the time I needed. Secure the girl. The second man roared, leveling his weapon at me. I kicked the yellow mop bucket. It skidded across the polished laminate floor like a curling stone, slamming into his shins. He stumbled, his shot going wide and shattering a vase of flowers on the teacher's desk. I was already moving. I wasn't Kyra the widow anymore. I was Ghost. I grabbed the spray bottle of industrial cleaner from my cart, a high-concentration ammonia mix I hadn't diluted yet. I rolled over the teacher's desk, sliding between the second man and Seola. As he corrected his aim, I squeezed the trigger, spraying a stream of burning chemical straight into his eyes. He howled, dropping the gun to claw at his face. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a freshly sharpened pencil from the jar on the desk. In one fluid motion, I drove it into the soft pressure point just beneath his ear. He dropped like a sack of cement. 2 down. The third man was the biggest. He saw his team fall and abandoned the tactical approach. He pulled a serrated combat knife and lunged. Die, bitch. I sidestepped his thrust, feeling the wind of the blade pass inches from my ribs. He was strong, but he was sloppy. He overcommitted. I grabbed his wrist with my left hand, twisting it outward until the joint popped, and simultaneously used my right hand to grab the heavy fire extinguisher off the wall. I didn't unpin it. I used it as a bludgeon. I swung it upward, connecting with his jaw. The sound was sickening, a wet crunch that echoed in the silent room. He collapsed backward, unconscious before he hit the ground. Silence returned to the classroom, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, chest heaving slightly, the red fire extinguisher still gripped in my hand. My heart rate was barely 100. I looked down at myself. My gray uniform was splattered with dirty mop water and a few specks of blood that weren't mine. I dropped the extinguisher. It clanged loudly against the floor. I turned slowly toward the corner. Ciola was looking up at me. She wasn't crying. Her dark eyes were wide, fixated on me. For years she had looked through me like I was glass. Now she was really seeing me. She saw the monster I kept chained in the dark. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice raspy. I reached out a trembling hand, realizing too late that my knuckles were bruised and bloody. "They can't hurt you." Before she could move, the sound of tires screeching outside broke the moment. Not one car. A fleet. Doors slammed. Shouting. The heavy thud of organized footsteps. The front doors, already broken, were kicked fully open. Kim Hyun-woo walked in. I had seen him in the tabloids. They called him the Dragon of Seoul. A legitimate CEO on paper. A warlord in reality. In person, the photos didn't do him justice. He was terrifyingly beautiful, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my life, soaked dark by the rain. His hair was slicked back, water dripping down a face carved from granite. He held a gun at his side, but he didn't raise it. Behind him, a dozen men with submachine guns fanned out, securing the perimeter. Hyun-woo's eyes swept the room. They took in the shattered glass. The unconscious mercenary with the pencil in his neck. The man groaning on the floor with a shattered jaw. Then, his gaze landed on Ciola. He saw she was untouched. Finally, his eyes locked on me. I stood between him and his daughter, hands empty, looking like a janitor who had just walked through a war zone. I should have been cowering. I should have been begging for mercy. But the adrenaline hadn't faded. I held his gaze, chin lifted. He walked toward me. The sound of his expensive leather shoes on the wet floor was rhythmic, deliberate. His men moved to check the bodies, but Hyun-woo ignored them completely. He stepped over the man I had bludgeoned with the extinguisher as if he were nothing more than trash. He stopped inches from me. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and cold fury. Up close, I could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. He was analyzing me, dismantling me with a look. He saw the way I stood. He saw the violence in my hands. He reached out. I flinched, instinctively preparing to block a strike, but he didn't hit me. His fingers, cold and rough, brushed against my cheekbone. I hadn't realized I'd taken a hit there during the scuffle, but it throbbed under his touch. His thumb grazed the swelling skin, a touch that was shockingly gentle for a man who looked like he wanted to burn the world down. "Who are you?" he murmured, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in my chest. "Just the cleaner," I said, my voice steady. He looked past me to the carnage I had created with a mop and a pencil. A dark, dangerous smirk ghosted across his lips. "No," he whispered. "You are no cleaner." He stepped closer, invading my space, his heat radiating against my damp uniform. He ignored the dead bodies, touched a bruise on my face, and said, "You saved my life's heart. Now, you belong to me." The walk from the preschool to the waiting motorcade felt like a funeral procession for my freedom. The rain had turned into a deluge. blurring the neon lights of Gangnam into streaks of bleeding color. Blue and red police lights flashed rhythmically against the wet pavement, but the sirens remained silent. That was the first sign of exactly who I was dealing with. 3 police cruisers were blocking the intersection, but the officers weren't rushing toward the preschool with guns drawn. They stood by their vehicles, arms crossed, their gazes averted as Kim Hyun-woo's men escorted me down the stairs. A sergeant nodded respectfully at Hyun-woo as we passed. They weren't here to investigate a multiple homicide. They were here to provide traffic control for the murderers. I was flanked by 2 guards who looked like they were carved from teak wood. They didn't touch me. Hyun-woo had given a subtle hand signal that forbade it, but they boxed me in. Hyun-woo walked ahead, carrying Seola in his arms. Her small head rested on his shoulder, buried in the expensive fabric of his suit. She had passed out from the adrenaline crash the moment he picked her up. He stopped at a sleek obsidian black Maybach that looked more like a tank than a car. A driver held the back door open. Hyun-woo placed Seola gently inside, then turned to me. He didn't speak. He just jerked his chin toward the interior. Get in. My instincts screamed at me. Run. The ghost inside my head calculated the odds. 3 seconds to throat punch the driver. 4 seconds to roll under the chassis. A 20% chance of making it to the alleyway before the submachine guns cut me in half. I didn't run. I couldn't outrun a man who owned the police. I ducked my head and climbed into the back of the beast. The door sealed shut with a heavy pressurized hiss that sucked the sound of the rain and the city away instantly. The silence inside was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. The interior was a different world. It smelled of power. Rich, conditioned leather, aged whiskey, and the cedarwood scent of the man sitting next to me. It was intoxicating and terrifying. In contrast, I smelled like a crime scene. The sharp, nose-burning stench of ammonia and bleach clung to my hair. My uniform was damp with sweat and dirty mop water. I felt filthy, a stain on his pristine upholstery. Hyun-woo tapped the partition glass. The car began to glide forward, smooth as oil on glass. I pressed myself against the door, putting as much distance between us as the luxury cabin allowed. I stared out the tinted window as Seoul rolled by. Why didn't I just let them take her? The question was ugly, but valid. I was a janitor. I was nobody. I was supposed to be invisible. That was the only way I survived the last 5 years. I closed my eyes, and for a second I wasn't in a Mafia boss's car. I was back at the kitchen table in my cramped, moldy apartment, staring at the stack of envelopes that never stopped coming. Past due. Final notice. Collections. $200,000. That was the price tag on my husband's life. That was what the experimental treatments, the hospital stays, and the false hope had cost. We had fought the cancer with everything we had, and the cancer had won anyway. He died holding my hand, apologizing for leaving me with nothing but ghosts and bills. After the funeral, the neighbors started whispering. I heard them when I walked to the bus stop. That's her, Mrs. Kim, from 3B would hiss. The Black Widow. They didn't mean it in the cool spy movie way. They meant it in the superstitious old world way. They said I was cursed. They said men who loved me died. They said I carried a cloud of misfortune that swallowed everything around me. They crossed the street when I approached. They pulled their children closer. Maybe they were right. I had been an operative for a government agency that didn't officially exist. I had toppled regimes and silenced targets across 3 continents. I survived war zones. But I couldn't save the one soft, good thing in my life. So I buried the operative. I buried Ghost. I took the jobs no one wanted. I scrubbed floors until my hands were raw, trying to wash away the debt and the guilt. I became the invisible janitor. But tonight, the invisible woman had snapped a man's neck with a fire extinguisher. Drink. The single word shattered my internal spiral. I opened my eyes. Hyun-woo was holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid out to me. His hand was steady, his eyes fixed on my profile. I hesitated, then took the glass. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I didn't drink. I just held it, the cold crystal biting into my palm. "You are analyzing the exits," he said. It wasn't a question. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something with his thumb, not even looking at me. "You checked the door lock mechanism 3 times in the last 4 minutes. You clocked the driver's sidearm in the reflection of the rearview mirror." He set his phone down on the center console and turned his entire body toward me. The leather creaked under his shift and weight. Who taught a janitor how to assess a tactical environment? "I watch a lot of movies," I lied. My voice was raspy, dry as sandpaper. Hyun-woo let out a short, dark chuckle. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a wolf amused by a rabbit's attempt to growl. "Movies," he repeated. He picked up a sleek black tablet from the seat pocket and tapped the screen. He slid it across the leather seat toward me. I looked down. It was a dossier. My dossier. Or rather, the dossier of the woman I was pretending to be. There was my photo, a grainy shot from my employee ID badge where I looked tired and washed out. Name, Kyra Jackson. Age, 29. Occupation, custodial staff, Hanbyol preschool. Status, widowed. Financial status, insolvent. Debt loads exceeding $200,000. Kyra Jackson. He read the name like he was tasting it, testing it for poison. Arrived in Seoul 5 years ago. Married to an English teacher who died of pancreatic cancer last year. Works 3 jobs. Sleeps 4 hours a night. Pays her creditors just enough to keep the wolves from the door. He leaned in closer. The air in the car suddenly felt very thin. That is a sad story, Kyra. A tragic story. The struggling widow drowning in debt. His eyes dropped to my hands, still clutching the whiskey glass. He looked at the bruised knuckles, the way the tendon stood out in my forearm. But sad widows do not dismantle a 3-man mercenary kill team in under 90 seconds using office supplies, he whispered. The volume of his voice dropped, but the intensity skyrocketed. I saw the bodies, Kyra. You didn't just hit them. You executed them. The pencil entry was anatomical perfection. The fire extinguisher strike, efficient. Brutal. He reached out and took the glass from my hand, setting it aside. He wanted my hands empty. He wanted my full attention. "They call you the Black Widow in your neighborhood because they think you are bad luck," he murmured, his face inches from mine. I could see the pores of his skin, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "But they are wrong. You aren't bad luck. You are a weapon. A weapon that has been rusting in a bucket of bleach." "What do you want?" I asked, dropping the pretense. My voice hardened, the tremble gone. If he saw the monster, I would let him see the monster. "The police will file a report stating that a rival gang attempted a kidnapping and was neutralized by my private security detail," Hyun-woo said, sitting back slightly, adjusting his cuffs. "You do not exist in that report. There will be no questions asked." "So I'm free to go?" He looked at me like I was insane. "Go? Go where? Back to your basement apartment? Back to scrubbing toilets while debt collectors harass you?" He shook his head slowly. "You saved Ciola. That creates a debt. My debt to you." He paused, and the air charged with electricity. "But you also saw my face. You saw my men. You saw the reality of who I am. And you displayed a skill set that makes you dangerous. That creates a liability." The car began to slow down. We were leaving the city center, heading up the winding private roads toward the Han River Hills, the district of the Untouchables. "I cannot let you go, Kyra. You know too much, and you are too valuable to be wasted on toilets." The car stopped. The lock clicked open. "You aren't going to jail," he said, his voice dropping to a command that vibrated in my spine. You are coming home with me. The door opened, letting in the cold wind, but I didn't feel the chill. I only felt the heat of his gaze. I was out of the frying pan and into the fire. And God help me, the fire looked beautiful. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 40 seconds. I counted them. My ears popped at the 20th floor, and again at the 40th. By the time the doors slid open on the 60th floor, I felt like I was entering the stratosphere. If the car was a tank, this place was a fortress built in the clouds. We stepped out into a sprawling expanse of black marble, chrome, and glass. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a museum for things you weren't allowed to touch. The walls were lined with abstract art that looked like violent slashes of paint on canvas, angry, expensive, and cold. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul, a glittering sea of lights that looked deceptive from this height. Down there, people were struggling, fighting, dying. Up here, it was silent. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that chilled the sweat on my skin. It smelled of ozone and white tea, sterile, like a high-end surgical suite. There were no family photos, no toys on the floor, no warmth. It was a palace of ice, and Kim Hyun-woo was the king. "Sir," a uniformed maid approached, bowing so low she nearly doubled over. She looked terrified. "We have prepared to take her," Hyun-woo interrupted, gesturing to Seola, who was still cradled in his arms, blinking awake. The maid stepped forward, her hands shaking. As Hyun-woo passed the girl over, Seola winced. A tiny, sharp intake of breath that only I heard. The maid didn't catch it. She grabbed Seola's arm to adjust her hold. Seola's face twisted in silent pain, her mouth opening in a soundless cry. "Stop," I snapped. The command tore out of my throat before I could check it. The maid froze. Hyun-woo turned, his eyes narrowing. I ignored the danger radiating off him and stepped forward, invading the maid's space. "Put her down. On the sofa. Now." The maid looked at Hyun-woo for permission. He gave a curt nod. She deposited Seola on the white leather sectional. I knelt beside the girl, my wet knees soaked into the pristine rug, leaving dark splotches of street water. I didn't care. The Black Widow was gone. The field medic was back. "It's okay, little one," I whispered, my voice dropping to the soothing cadence I used to use on soldiers bleeding out in the dirt. "Let me see." I gently rolled up the sleeve of her cardigan. There it was, a deep, jagged abrasion on her forearm, oozing blood, likely from when the mercenary had grabbed her. The maid gasped. Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. "Get me a first aid kit," I ordered, not looking up. "I need saline, gauze, antibiotic ointment, and a butterfly closure." "Move." The maid scrambled away. I focused on Seola. I checked her pupils, equal, round, reactive to light. I pressed her nail bed, capillary refill under 2 seconds. No concussion, no shock, just fear and a nasty scrape. "You're brave," I told her, my hands moving with practiced, fluid speed as the maid returned with a white box. I tore open the saline packet with my teeth. "This will sting for a second, then it gets better." I cleaned the wound, applied the ointment, and sealed it with a butterfly strip. It was a 3-minute procedure that I did in 30 seconds. Professional, clinical, perfect. When I finished, I looked up. Hyun-woo was standing directly over me. He wasn't looking at his daughter's arm. He was looking at my hands. He had watched the way I checked for a concussion, the way I immobilized the limb, the economy of my movements. He had seen the training. "The maid could have done that," he said quietly. "The maid was grabbing the injury," I replied, standing up. My knees cracked. I suddenly felt very conscious of my appearance. My sneakers were cheap canvas, worn through at the toes, squelching with dirty rainwater. My uniform was a shapeless gray sack. Standing next to him in his Italian wool suit, in his glass castle, I felt like a rat that had crawled out of a sewer. "Put Seola to bed," Hyun-woo ordered the staff, his eyes never leaving mine. "Then leave us." Ciola reached out a small hand toward me as she was carried away, her fingers grasping at the air. I gave her a small, tired smile. Then she was gone, down a long, dark hallway. "Follow me," Hyunwoo said. He led me into his office. It was a cavernous room dominated by a desk made of dark, heavy wood that looked like it had been salvaged from a shipwreck. He walked behind it and sat down, the leather chair groaning softly. He didn't invite me to sit. I stood in the center of the room, dripping on his floor. "You have medical training," he stated. "Combat casualty care?" "Something like that," I muttered. He opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk. Then he pulled out a checkbook. "I made some calls on the ride over," he said. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper was loud in the silence. He ripped the check out and placed it on top of the document. I looked at the numbers. $200,000. The breath left my lungs. It was a number that had haunted me for 18 months. It was the weight that crushed my chest every morning when I woke up. It was the reason I ate instant noodles and walked 5 miles to work to save bus fare. "That clears the debt," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Every cent. The hospital, the funeral home, the credit cards you maxed out trying to save him." I stared at the check. It was freedom. It was a restart. "And this," he tapped the document, "is an employment contract. You will become Ciola's personal mood maker, her shadow, her nanny, her bodyguard." "I'm a janitor," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You were a janitor," he corrected. "Now, you are mine." He leaned back, steepled his fingers. "The pay is $10,000 a month plus room and board. You will live here, in the staff quarters. You will be with her when she wakes up, and you will be watching her door when she sleeps." "I can't," I said. The words tasted like ash. His eyebrows rose. "You are refusing? I am offering you a life, Kyra. I am pulling you out of the gutter." "You don't understand," I said, stepping forward, desperation clawing at my throat. "It's not about the money. I can't be around her. I can't be around people." "Why?" "Because the rumors are true," I choked out. "Not the magic, the reality. Everyone I love dies, Hyunwoo. Everyone I get close to gets hurt. My husband, my team, my parents. I am a magnet for death. If I stay here, if I get close to that little girl, something bad will happen. I am cursed." I meant it. I wasn't fishing for sympathy, I was giving him a warning. I was a black hole. Hyunwoo stood up. He moved around the desk, slow and predatory. He closed the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I tried to step back, but my heels hit the heavy leather chair behind me. I was trapped. He looked down at me. Up close, his eyes were terrifying, abysses of control and violence. He reached out and tucked a strand of damp, dirty hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered on my neck, right over my pulse point. He could feel my heart hammering against my skin. "You think you are dangerous?" he asked, his voice a low purr. "You think you bring death?" He laughed, a dark, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Kyra, look around you. I built this empire on bones. I walk through fire every day. I eat threats for breakfast." He leaned down, his lips inches from my ear. I could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. "You are worried about your curse? You are worried that death follows you?" He pulled back to look me in the eye. His expression was pure arrogance, the look of a god who had forgotten what it meant to bleed. "I am the dragon of soul," he whispered. "Death works for me." He grabbed my hand, the one with the bruised knuckles, and pressed the pen into my palm. "Sign the paper, Kyra. Stop running. You are in the safest place on earth, because you are in the devil's house." I looked at the check. I looked at his hard, beautiful, terrifying face. I looked at the pen in my hand. I was selling my soul. I knew it. But the ghost inside me was tired of running, and the woman inside me was tired of starving. I took the pen. I bent over the desk, the water from my clothes dripping onto the expensive wood, and I signed my name. Good, Hyun-woo said, watching the ink dry. Welcome to hell. The first thing to go was the smell. A maid with a face like stone took my gray uniform, my worn-out sneakers, and even my underwear. She threw them into an incinerator chute in the laundry room. I watched them disappear. The bleach, the sweat, the memories of the preschool floor. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like I was being skinned. I was scrubbed, polished, and reconstructed. I stood in front of a mirror that was taller than my old apartment, staring at a stranger. The woman in the glass wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that cost more than my car, and loose, flowing silk trousers that whispered when I moved. I looked soft. I looked harmless. I looked like a mother. But under the cashmere, my muscles were still coiled tight. Under the silk, my skin was still mapped with the faint white lines of old knife wounds and shrapnel scars. I felt like a wolf wrestled into a sheep costume. It was itchy. It was a lie. Dinner is served, the maid announced, her eyes avoiding mine. I followed her to the dining room. It was a cavernous hall dominated by a table long enough to land a plane on. At the far end, framed by the darkness of the city skyline outside the window, sat Kim Hyun-woo. He didn't stand when I entered. He just watched. I sat at the opposite end, 10 feet of polished mahogany between us. The silence was heavy, pressurized. It wasn't the comfortable silence of companionship. It was the silence of a predator assessing a new element in its territory. A server placed a plate in front of me. Filet mignon, medium rare. Truffle mash. Glazed asparagus. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Rich, savory, fatty. My stomach gave a treacherous growl that echoed in the quiet room. I hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. I had been surviving on vending machine crackers and adrenaline. I picked up my fork. I tried to be elegant. I tried to mimic the way he held his silverware, loose and aristocratic. But the moment the meat hit my tongue, the animal took over. I ate fast, efficiently. I didn't savor, I consumed. It was a habit from the field, and a habit from poverty. Eat while there is food, because you don't know when it will come again. Hyun-woo didn't eat. He held a glass of dark red wine, swirling it slowly. His plate was untouched. He watched my throat work as I swallowed. He watched my hands grip the fork. His gaze was physical, a tactile weight on my skin. He wasn't disgusted by my hunger. He was fascinated by it. "You eat like you are running out of time," he said, his voice cutting through the clinking of my cutlery. I paused, wiping a speck of sauce from my lip. I usually am. He took a sip of wine, his eyes dark over the rim of the glass. "You aren't running anymore, Kyra. You are sitting still. Can you handle that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Stillness is when the ghosts catch up." He lowered the glass. "Then let them come. We have room for ghosts here." The meal ended as abruptly as it began. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and left without a word. I was left alone with the empty plates and the lingering scent of his cologne, cedarwood and rain. Night in the penthouse was different than night in the city. In my old apartment, night was noisy. Sirens, drunk neighbors, the hum of the refrigerator. Here it was a tomb. The bed in the staff quarters, which were nicer than any hotel I'd ever stayed in, was too soft. It felt like quicksand. I lay there for 3 hours, staring at the ceiling, my body rejecting the luxury. I couldn't sleep. My internal clock was still set to survive. At 200 am, I gave up. I slipped out of bed, barefoot. The expensive carpet swallowed my footsteps. I moved through the halls like smoke, checking sightlines, checking corners. It was instinct. I needed to know the perimeter. I found myself outside a heavy oak door. Ciola. The door was ajar. I pushed it open an inch. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of a nightlight shaped like a star. Ciola was sitting up in her bed, her knees pulled to her chest. She wasn't sleeping. She was staring at the shadows in the corner of the room, her eyes wide and alert. She looked so small, so lonely. I stepped inside. I didn't announce myself. I just flowed into the room, keeping my movements slow and deliberate so I wouldn't startle her. She saw me. She tensed for a second, then relaxed when she recognized the cleaner. I sat on the edge of the rug, a few feet from her bed. I didn't speak. Words were pressure, and she had enough pressure. I raised my hands into the beam of the nightlight. I made a bird. My thumbs locked, fingers fluttering like wings. I made it fly across the wall, dipping and diving. Ciola watched, mesmerized. I changed the shape. I made a dog. I made it bark silently, opening and closing my thumb. Then, I tried to make a rabbit. But my fingers were stiff from gripping the mop handle for years, and my coordination slipped. The rabbit's ears twisted, and it ended up looking like a lopsided blob with a broken neck. I sighed, shaking my head at my own shadow. I looked at Ciola and pulled a face, puffing out my cheeks and crossing my eyes, mimicking the deformed shadow monster I had just created. It happened in an instant. A sound. It was rusty, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years. A small, hiccuping noise. Then another. Then a clear, bell-like giggle. Ciola clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Her shoulders shook. She was laughing. The sound hit me harder than a bullet. It was pure. It was light. It was the first real thing I had seen in this glass prison. I smiled back, a genuine smile that cracked the mask I'd been wearing for 5 years. 3 floors down, in the master's study, the air was thick with smoke. Kim Hyun-woo sat in the dark, the only light coming from the bank of high-definition monitors on his wall. He wasn't working. He wasn't looking at stock prices or hit lists. He was watching camera feed 4, the nursery. He had been watching Kyra since she left her room. He had watched her prowl the hallways with the silent, lethal grace of a jungle cat. He had seen her check the exits. He knew exactly what she was. But now, he sat frozen. Through the grainy night vision feed, he saw the shadow puppets. He saw the goofy face she made. And then, the audio pickup on his desk flickered. The waveform spiked. The laugh. Hyun-woo stopped breathing. He replayed the sound in his head. He hadn't heard that sound since the accident, since the silence took his daughter. Doctors had told him it might never come back. They said the trauma was too deep. And yet, here was this woman, this widow, this cleaner, this killer, pulling joy out of the darkness with nothing but her hands and a silly face. He leaned forward, the leather of his chair groaning. He stared at Kyra's pixelated face on the screen. He looked at the curve of her neck, the softness of her smile that was directed at his child. His chest tightened. It wasn't desire, though that was there, lurking in the deep. It was fear. He had brought her here to be a shield, a disposable asset to catch bullets. But looking at his daughter's shaking shoulders, hearing that precious, impossible sound, he realized he had made a miscalculation. He hadn't just brought a bodyguard into his home. He had brought a spark into a room filled with gasoline. Hope, he whispered to the empty room, the word tasting like danger. He reached out and touched the screen, right over Kyra's image. "You really are a witch," he murmured. "And God help me, I think I'm going to let you cast your spell." The sky over Seoul didn't just break. It detonated. The thunder was a physical blow, a concussive wave that rattled the tempered glass walls of the penthouse. To anyone else, it was just a storm. To me, it was Kandahar. It was Venezuela. It was the mortar round that hit the convoy 3 cars back. I woke up gasping, my sheets tangled around my legs like tripwires. My heart was a frantic bird battering against my ribs. "Breathe, Kyra. It's just rain. It's just noise. But the ghost didn't believe me. My skin pricked with phantom shrapnel. I couldn't stay in the small staff room. The walls felt like they were closing in, shrinking into the dimensions of a holding cell. I needed space. I needed to see the threat. I stumbled out into the hallway, wearing only the slip of silver silk Hyunwoo's stylist had left for me. It was thin, barely there, designed for a woman who slept in climate-controlled luxury, not a soldier sweating out a flashback. I made it to the main living area. The room was dark, swallowed by the shadows, until a fork of lightning stabbed the skyline. The flash illuminated the room in stark, blue-white relief. The sharp angles of the furniture, the cold marble, and the silhouette of the man standing by the window. Kim Hyun-woo. He was facing the storm, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn when I entered. He didn't have to. He knew the sound of my breathing. He knew the weight of my step. "You are awake," he said. His voice was low, competing with the rumble of thunder that rolled through the floorboards. "The noise," I managed to say, clutching my arms across my chest. "It's loud. It's just thunder, Kyra." "Not to me," I whispered. He turned then. Another flash of lightning ripped the sky open, and for a second the darkness vanished. The light hit me. The silk of my nightgown was translucent in the harsh glare, clinging to the sweat on my skin. And in that merciless strobe light my secrets were laid bare. I saw his eyes widen. He wasn't looking at my curves. He was looking at my right shoulder. The silk strap had slipped. Exposed on my skin was a knot of twisted, ugly tissue. A keloid scar the size of a fist where a sniper's bullet had shattered my scapula 5 years ago. It was jagged, raised, and white against my skin. A map of violence. He set his glass down on the side table with a sharp clink. He walked toward me, the predator approaching the wounded animal. I should have covered myself. I should have pulled the strap up. But I was frozen, pinned by the storm outside and the storm inside his eyes. He stopped inches from me. I could smell the peat of the whiskey, the ozone of the storm, and the heat radiating from his body. He reached out. His fingers were cool, dry. He didn't touch my face. He touched the scar. His thumb traced the ridge of the old wound, a slow, deliberate caress that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. It wasn't sexual, yet it was the most intimate thing anyone had done to me in years. He was reading my history in Braille. "Who did this to you?" he asked. His voice was a dangerous rumble, darker than the thunder. "A job," I breathed, my voice trembling. "A long time ago. A job that went wrong." "This is not a work accident, Kyra," he murmured, his eyes locked on mine. "This is war. This is torture." His hand slid from my shoulder to my neck, his thumb resting against the erratic pulse in my throat. "You have so much pain trapped in this small body." "I'm not the only one," I countered. The whiskey on his breath was intoxicating. "You stand in the dark drinking alone. You don't sleep either." Hyunwoo's jaw tightened. He moved his hand, guiding my fingers to his own chest, right over his heart. Beneath the crisp white dress shirt, I felt the hard muscle, but I also felt something else. Ridges. The unnatural texture of skin that had been melted and reformed. "Fire," he whispered. 5 years ago. The same fire that took my wife. The same fire that took Ciola's voice. I traced the shape of the burn through the fabric. It wrapped around his ribs, a dragon of scar tissue hidden beneath the suit of a king. "We are the same," he said, stepping closer. He was so close now that his thighs brushed against mine. The friction burned. The air between us was thick, heavy with the pressure of the storm and the undeniable, magnetic pull of two people who recognized the wreckage in each other. He leaned in. His eyes dropped to my lips. My breath hitched. I tilted my head back, surrendering to the gravity. I wanted him to kiss me. I wanted him to erase the sound of the artillery with a taste of whiskey and power. I felt his breath on my mouth. I closed my eyes, waiting for the collision. The thunder cracked again, shaking the building. Hyun-woo froze. He pulled back. Not far, just an inch. But that inch felt like a canyon. He looked at me, his eyes blown wide, his pupils dilated black. He looked like a man starving to death who had just pushed a banquet table away. His chest heaved once, a sharp intake of air, as if he was struggling to regain control. He dropped his hand from my neck. The loss of contact left my skin cold. "Go to sleep, Kyra," he rasped, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. He turned his back on me, facing the window and the chaos outside once more. He picked up his glass, his knuckles white around the crystal. "Go," he commanded, softer this time, but with a steel edge. "Before I forget that you are an employee, and before I do something that neither of us can survive." The dress was blood red. It lay on the bed like a pool of spilled wine, shimmering under the chandelier. It was backless, sleeveless, and had a slit that ran up to my hip. A stylist had brought it along with a pair of heels that looked like torture devices made of diamonds. I picked it up. The silk was heavy, cool to the touch. It was beautiful. It was a masterpiece. But I wasn't looking at the fashion. I was looking at the physics. I turned the fabric inside out. Reinforced seams. Good. It wouldn't rip if I had to tackle a man to the ground. The skirt was loose enough for a roundhouse kick. The bodice was tight, minimizing drag. I slipped it on. It fit like a second skin, clinging to every curve, highlighting the muscle definition I usually hid under baggy sweats. I lifted the heavy skirt. On my left thigh, stark against my skin, was a black neoprene garter. I slid a 4-inch ceramic blade into the holster. It was non-metallic, undetectable by the wands at the security checkpoint. I wasn't a Cinderella going to the ball. I was a gladiator entering the arena. When I walked out into the foyer, Kim Hyun-woo was waiting. He was adjusting his cufflinks, staring into the middle distance. He wore a tuxedo that was midnight blue, cut so sharp it could draw blood. He turned when he heard my heels click on the marble. His hands stilled. His eyes swept over me, starting at the floor and dragging slowly up to my face. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a compliment. He just stared, his expression darkening, his pupils expanding until his eyes were almost entirely black. "Red," he murmured, walking toward me. "The color of warning." "And the color of the target," I replied, my voice steady despite the way my heart hammered as he entered my personal space. "If they're looking at me, they aren't looking at you." He stopped in front of me. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of my neck, his thumb resting on the pulse of my throat. "Let them look," he whispered, his voice possessive, heavy with a heat that made my knees weak. "But if anyone touches, I will burn the city down." The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt. It was a charity event for underprivileged youth, which was ironic, considering the diamond necklace on the woman in front of me cost enough to build 3 schools. The moment the valet opened the door of the Maybach, the world exploded into flashes. Flash. 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 It was a strobe light nightmare. The paparazzi screamed Hyun-woo's name. They surged against the velvet ropes like zombies. Hyun-woo stepped out first. He buttoned his jacket, scanned the crowd with a look of utter boredom, and then reached a hand back for me. I took it. His grip was iron. He pulled me out, tucking my hand into the crook of his arm. He didn't just guide me, he anchored me. "Smile, Kyra," he whispered through his teeth, waving at a camera. "You are the woman who captured the dragon. Look triumphant." I didn't smile. I gave the cameras the cool, detached look of a woman who was bored by their adoration. Inside, I was scanning every face. Suit at 3 o'clock reaching into his jacket. Phone, clear. Waiter at 9 o'clock moving too fast. Tray, clear. We moved through the gauntlet and into the ballroom. It smelled of expensive champagne, heavy perfume, and lies. The room was filled with the sharks of soul, politicians, tech moguls, and the mobsters who funded them both. They all smiled with too many teeth. "Keep your back to the wall when you can," I whispered to Hyun-woo as we accepted 2 flutes of champagne from a passing server. "Relax," he murmured, taking a sip. "Tonight is about politics, not bullets. In my experience, they are the same thing." "Ah, nephew." The voice was oily, slick with false cheer. We turned. A man was approaching us. He was short, balding, with a face that looked like soft dough. He wore a tuxedo that was slightly too tight, straining at the gut. But his eyes were reptilian, cold, dead, and sharp. "Director Choi. The snake." "Director Choi," Hyun-woo said. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hyun-woo didn't bow. He barely nodded. "I didn't think you'd show," Choi said, his gaze flicking to me. He licked his lips. It was a grotesque, unconscious tic. "I heard you were having domestic troubles. A sick child?" "Seola is fine," Hyun-woo said, his voice flat. Good, Choi smirked. He stepped closer, invading our space. He looked me up and down, lingering on the slit in my dress, on the exposed skin of my back. He didn't look at me like a person. He looked at me like a piece of meat in a butcher shop window. "And who is this?" Choi asked, gesturing to me with his glass. "I didn't know you were hiring escorts these days, Hyun-woo. Though, I suppose with your wife gone, a man has needs." The insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. He called me a whore, in front of the entire elite of Seoul. I felt my muscles coil. I calculated the distance. I could shatter his wine glass into his face, drive the stem into his jugular, and be out the back exit before his body hit the floor. My hand twitched toward my thigh, but Hyun-woo moved first. He didn't strike. He didn't shout. He laughed. It was a soft, chilling sound. He took half a step forward, placing his body partially in front of mine, shielding me. He leaned down, bringing his face close to Choi's ear, but he spoke loud enough for the circle of eavesdroppers to hear. "Careful, uncle," Hyun-woo said, his voice silky and terrifyingly pleasant. "You are confusing your cheap instinct with my expensive taste." Hyun-woo's hand slid from my arm to the small of my back. His fingers splayed out, pressing warm and heavy against my bare skin. It was a claim, a brand. "This is not an escort," Hyun-woo continued, his eyes locking onto Choi's. "And if you look at her like that again, I will pluck your eyes out and feed them to you." Choi's smile faltered. He took a step back, paling. "I was just joking, Hyun-woo. No need to be so serious." "She isn't just a pretty face, Choi," Hyun-woo whispered, his smile not reaching his dead, cold eyes. "She bites. And I am the only one holding the leash. Do not make me let go." He held Choi's gaze for 3 agonizing seconds. The message was clear. She is mine. Insult her, and you die. Choi swallowed hard, nodded jerkily, and scuttled away into the crowd like a roach fleeing the light. Hyun-woo didn't relax. I could feel the tension vibrating through his hand on my back. I looked up at him. His jaw was clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He wasn't acting. This wasn't a performance for the other mobsters. He was shaking with rage. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He looked down at me. The darkness in his eyes cleared, replaced by something raw and intense. He looked at me not as a tool, not as a shield, but as something precious that someone had tried to dirty. "Did you hear him?" He rasped. "The way he spoke to you?" "I've been called worse by better men," I said. "Not while you are with me," he hissed. His grip on my waist tightened, pulling me flush against him. "While you stand by my side, you are a queen, and I will kill anyone who forgets that." My breath hitched. I had spent 5 years being invisible. I had spent a lifetime being a weapon, an object to be used and discarded. No one had ever defended me. No one had ever stood in front of the bullet for me. I looked at the monster in the midnight blue suit. I saw the violence in his hands and the fire in his soul. And in the middle of the crowded ballroom surrounded by enemies, I realized the most dangerous thing of all. I wasn't just working for him anymore. I was falling for him. The morning sun didn't just rise. It spilled like liquid gold across the penthouse floor. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't wake up reaching for a weapon. I woke up to the smell of brewing coffee and the sound of silence that felt peaceful, not heavy. I walked into the kitchen. Kim Hyun-woo was there, leaning against the marble island, reading a tablet. He wasn't wearing his armor, the suit. He was in a simple white t-shirt and gray lounge pants. He looked younger, softer. He looked up as I entered. He didn't scowl. The corner of his mouth ticked up in a ghost of a smile. "Coffee?" he asked, pushing a mug toward me. "Black," I said, taking it. Our fingers brushed against the ceramic. The electricity was still there, buzzing under the surface, but the storm had passed. I took a sip. It was perfect. I looked at him over the rim of the mug. For a moment, I let myself imagine a life where I wasn't the ghost, and he wasn't the dragon. A life where we were just two damaged people having breakfast. I let my guard down. I let the armor drop. That was my mistake. In my world, peace is just the deep breath before the scream. The elevator doors chimed. Not the guest chime. The override chime. Chief of Security Han stormed in. He had never liked me. He looked at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered into a sterile lab. But today, he didn't look annoyed. He looked triumphant. He had a manila envelope in his hand. "Sir," Han said, not bowing. "We need to talk. Now." Hyun-woo didn't move, but the softness in his eyes evaporated. "I am having coffee, Han. It can wait." "It cannot wait," Han said, slamming the envelope onto the island between us. The coffee in my mug rippled. "Unless you want to keep drinking with the woman who sold you out to Director Choi." The air left the room. Hyun-woo set his mug down. Very slowly. "Explain." Han ripped the envelope open. Spread the photos on the marble. They were grainy, taken with a long-range lens. They showed me, 3 days ago, standing in an alleyway. I was handing a package to a man in a trench coat. I recognized the man. He was a street vendor I bought prepaid SIM cards from. But in the photo, with the shadows, he looked exactly like one of Choi's lieutenants. "Circumstantial," Hyun-woo said, his voice dropping an octave. "Kyra has many contacts. And the payment?" Han sneered. He slapped a bank statement down on top of the photos. "This morning at 400 a.m. A wire transfer of $500,000. From a shell company registered to Director Choi. Destination: the exact account Kyra Jackson used to pay off her husband's medical bills." I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was a perfect frame-up. The timestamp, the account numbers, it was professional work. Only someone with deep access to my history could have forged this. Hyun-woo looked at the paper. He stared at the numbers. "Kyra?" He said my name like a question, like a prayer. He was giving me a chance. "I didn't do this," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. "Hyun-woo, look at me. The photos are out of context. The transfer is a plant. Anyone can wire money to an account if they have the number. It's a setup." "A setup?" Han laughed. "You are the Black Widow. You infiltrate, you seduce, you destroy. That is what you do. Director Choi offered you a better deal, didn't he? $500,000 to open the back door?" Hyun-woo picked up the bank statement. His hand didn't shake. He read it once, twice. Then he looked at me. The man who had touched my scars during the storm was gone. The man who had defended me at the gala was dead. The dragon was back. And he was looking at me with eyes that were absolute zero. "Get out, Han," Hyun-woo whispered. "But sir." "Get out." Hyun-woo roared, the sound shattering the morning peace. Han bowed and retreated to the elevator, a smug smirk plastered on his face. We were alone. Hyunwoo walked around the island. He moved with a terrifying calm. He stopped 2 feet from me. I let you in, he said softly. I let you touch my daughter. I let you see my scars. Hyunwoo, please, use your head. If I wanted to kill you, you'd be dead. Why would I take a wire transfer that could be traced? Because you are arrogant, he spat. Because you thought I was too blinded by whatever this is, to check. He reached into the waistband of his pants. He pulled a gun, a Sig Sauer P226. He raised it. He pressed the cold steel barrel against the center of my forehead. I didn't flinch, I didn't beg. I looked him straight in the eyes. Do it, I whispered. If you believe it, pull the trigger. His finger tightened on the trigger. I saw the muscles in his forearm flex. I braced myself for the darkness. I deserved it, in a cosmic sort of way. Not for this betrayal, but for all the others. But the shot didn't come. His hand began to shake, a micro-tremor. His eyes were glassy, swimming with a mixture of rage and agonizing heartbreak. He looked like a man who was ripping his own heart out of his chest. He couldn't do it. He let out a strangled sound, half sob, half growl, and whipped the pistol away from my head. He slammed the butt of the gun into the marble counter, cracking the stone. Go, he choked out. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, breathing hard. Hyunwoo, go. He screamed, swinging the gun toward the elevator. Get out of my house. Get out of my city. If I see you in Seoul again, if I see your face, I will kill you myself. I swear it. I looked at his turned back. I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream the truth. But I knew the look in his eyes. He was past logic. He was drowning in betrayal. Any word I said now would just be another lie to him. I turned around. I walked to the elevator. I didn't look back. 10 minutes later, I was on the street. I had no coat, no purse, just the clothes on my back and the crushing weight of failure. It had started to rain again, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked me to the bone. I stood on the sidewalk outside his building, watching the towering fortress of glass disappear into the mist. I was exiled. I was homeless. I was the Black Widow again, alone, hated, and cursed. I started to walk. I should head to the bus station. I should disappear. That was the order. But then, the ghost woke up. I stopped in the middle of a puddle. I replayed the scene in the kitchen. The timing. Han's triumphant entry. The specificity of the bank transfer. It wasn't just a frame-up to get me fired. If they just wanted me gone, they could have killed me. No, they needed me discredited. They needed Hyunwoo to hate me. They needed me out of the penthouse, not just dead, but exiled. Why? Because as long as I was in that penthouse, Hyunwoo was safe. I checked the food. I checked the perimeter. I checked the shadows. With me, gone, he was alone. He was heartbroken. He was distracted. They didn't kick me out to punish me. They kicked me out to clear the path to him. I looked up at the penthouse one last time. The rain mixed with the tears on my face, but my eyes were dry. You idiot, I whispered to the invisible Hyunwoo. You just threw away your shield. I turned away from the bus station. I turned toward the dark underbelly of the city, toward the contacts I hadn't used in 5 years. I wasn't leaving Seoul. Kyra the nanny was gone. The widow was back, and she was going hunting. The rain in Seoul is cold enough to crack bone, but on the roof of the tenement building across from the penthouse, I didn't feel it. I had been crouching behind an AC unit for 14 hours. I had no coat. I had wrapped myself in a plastic tarp scavenged from a dumpster. I had no rifle. I held a pair of cheap binoculars I'd stolen from a pawn shop, and a jagged piece of rebar I'd sharpened on the concrete. I was waiting for the inevitable. I knew Han was the traitor. I knew the timetable. You don't frame the bodyguard unless you plan to hit the principal immediately after. At 200 am, the lights in the penthouse didn't just turn off, they were cut. Through the binoculars, I saw the shadows move. Not the shadows of clouds, but the sharp tactical silhouettes of men rappelling down from the helipad. Breach. I dropped the tarp. The ghost didn't need warmth. I sprinted to the edge of the roof. The gap between the buildings was 20 feet, but there was a construction crane servicing the tower's facade. I didn't think. I leaped, catching the wet steel of the crane's arm. The impact shuddered through my shoulders, threatening to tear my sockets. But I held on. I scrambled up the metal, sliding down the cable until I hit the balcony of the 58th floor. I was 2 floors below him. I pulled the Glock 19 I'd taken off a dealer in an alleyway 3 hours ago. I checked the mag. 12 rounds. I didn't use the stairs. I used the external maintenance ladder, climbing straight up into the storm, climbing toward the gunfire. Inside the penthouse, it was a slaughterhouse. I entered through the laundry chute utility panel, dropping into the service hallway. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, blood, and expensive cologne. I moved silent and low, stepping over the body of a maid. Then a guard. Then another. I reached the main atrium. Kim Hyun-woo was still alive, but barely. He was backed against the shattered remains of the floor-to-ceiling aquarium. The water had drained out, leaving flopping exotic fish dying on the marble mixed with the blood of the 6 men he had already killed. He was a mess. His white shirt was soaked red. He was favoring his left leg, and his right arm hung uselessly at his side, likely dislocated. He held a combat knife in his left hand, his chest heaving. He looked like a demon at the end of the world, broken, vicious, and refusing to die. 5 mercenaries had him surrounded. They had guns trained on him, but they weren't shooting yet. They were toying with him. Standing behind them, untouched and smug, was Han. "It's over, sir," Han said, kicking a piece of broken glass toward Hyun-woo. "Just tell us where the ledger is and we make it quick." Hyun-woo spat a mouthful of blood onto the white floor. "Come and get it." One of the mercenaries stepped forward, raising his rifle to kneecap him. I didn't wait. I pulled the pin on the smoke grenade I'd rigged from potassium nitrate and sugar, kitchen chemistry, and rolled it across the floor. It hissed. A thick, white cloud erupted, swallowing the room in an instant. Contact. Han screamed. Fire. They fired blindly into the smoke. Bullets chewed up the walls, the furniture, the art. But I wasn't where they were shooting. I was already moving through the gray haze. I was the ghost. This was my element. I slid behind the first mercenary. I didn't waste a bullet. I slashed his hamstring with the rebar shiv, bringing him to his knees, and put a single round through the base of his skull. The second man turned. I used the falling body of the first as a shield, shoving it into him. As he stumbled, I fired twice. Double tap to the chest. 3 down. The smoke was clearing. The remaining 2 mercenaries panicked. They spun around, looking for the threat. I stepped out of the haze, 5 feet from Hyun-woo. One mercenary raised his weapon at me. I threw the empty gun at his face, a distraction, and closed the distance. I drove the rebar into his throat. He gurgled and dropped. The last mercenary, the biggest one, lunged at me with a knife. I sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, used his own momentum to flip him over my hip and snapped his neck before he hit the ground. Silence crashed back into the room. Han was gone. He had fled the moment the smoke popped. Coward. I stood there, chest heaving, covered in the blood of men who weren't me. I looked at Hyun-woo. He had slid down the wall, sitting in the water and glass. He was staring up at me with wide, shocked eyes. He looked at the bodies. He looked at me. "I told you to leave," he rasped, his voice wet with pain. "I told you I would kill you." I walked over to him. I holstered the knife. I reached down and grabbed his good arm, hauling him to his feet. He groaned, but he stood. I don't take orders from clients who haven't paid their bill, I said, my voice flat. He swayed, leaning his weight against me. His blood soaked into my wet clothes, warm and sticky. He looked at my face, searching for the betrayal, searching for the lie. He found only the truth. Kyra, he whispered, you came back. I never left, I replied. I was watching. I looked around the devastated room. The silence was wrong. It was too quiet. Where is she? I asked. The dread hit me harder than the cold. Hyun-woo. Where is Seola? Hyun-woo froze. The pain in his body seemed to vanish, replaced by a horror that was absolute. He looked toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The door was kicked in. Han. He choked out. While I was fighting them, Han went to the back. I ran to the hallway. I didn't need to go all the way to the room. I saw the stuffed rabbit lying in the middle of the corridor, face down. Gone. I walked back to the atrium. Hyun-woo was staring at his hands, trembling. The dragon was broken. They took her, he whispered. They took my heart. I walked up to him. I grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at me. I smeared blood on his cheek, but I didn't care. Listen to me, I commanded. We don't have time to bleed. And we don't have time to grieve. I picked up a discarded submachine gun from the floor. I checked the chamber. Full. I slapped it into his chest. He grabbed it instinctively. Han thinks he has leverage, I said, my voice turning into the cold, metallic tone of the operative I used to be. He thinks he has won because he has the girl, but he forgot one thing. What? Hyun-woo asked, a flicker of light returning to his dead eyes. He forgot that he didn't just steal a Mafia princess, I said, racking the slide of my own weapon. He stole my kid. I turned toward the elevator. Get up, dragon. We're going hunting. The Incheon dock smelled of brine, diesel, and rot. It was a graveyard for ships and secrets. A sprawling labyrinth of rusted shipping containers and abandoned warehouses that leaned into the gray, churning sea. We moved through the shadows of an old meat processing plant. The rain here was horizontal, driven by a wind that screamed off the water. Stay behind me, I whispered. Hyun-woo didn't argue. He was pale, his skin the color of wet ash. His white shirt was more red than white now, soaked through from the shoulder wound and the cuts on his chest. He was running on fumes, fueled only by the terrifying fatherly rage that burns hotter than any fire. He gripped the submachine gun with his good hand, dragging his bad leg. 2 ahead, I signaled, spotting the heat signatures of cigarettes in the dark. I moved. I didn't run, I flowed. I was the darkness. I slipped behind the first sentry, clamped a hand over his mouth, and drove my blade into the base of his skull. He dropped without a sound. The second man turned, sensing the movement, but I was already there. I swept his legs and crushed his windpipe with a stomp of my boot before he could shout. Clear, I breathed. Hyun-woo limped past the bodies. He didn't look at them. His eyes were fixed on the heavy iron doors at the end of the catwalk. She's in there, he rasped. I can feel her. I checked my ammo. 3 rounds left in the Glock. 1 knife. And 2 people to save. We go in hard, I said. I draw their fire. You get the girl. No, Hyun-woo said, straightening up, ignoring the blood dripping from his fingertips. They want the dragon. I will give them the dragon. You take the shot. He kicked the doors open. The main kill floor was a cavernous space of hanging chains and rusted hooks. In the center, illuminated by a single harsh floodlight, was a scene from a nightmare. Seola was tied to a chair. The chair was balanced precariously on the edge of a grated walkway that overlooked a dark, industrial grinder pit. The machinery was silent, but the drop was fatal. Standing next to her was Han, holding a remote detonator, likely for the chair's rigging, and sitting on a crate, smoking a cigar, was Director Choi. Right on time, Choi smiled, the smoke curling around his doughy face. I was worried you'd bled out in the car. Hyun-woo stepped into the light. He looked broken, swaying slightly, his gun hanging low. Let her go, Choi. This is between us. It was between us, Choi corrected. Until you let that bitch embarrass me. Until you decided to play house instead of paying your dues. Choi stood up and pulled a gold-plated revolver from his jacket. He walked over to Seola. He stroked her hair. Seola flinched violently, her eyes wide and screaming with silent terror. Drop the gun, Hyun-woo, Choi commanded. Or Han pushes the button, and your little mute learns how to fly. Hyun-woo hesitated. He looked at Seola. He looked at the drop. He dropped the gun. It clattered loudly on the metal grate. On your knees, Choi barked. Hyun-woo sank to his knees. The great dragon of soul, humbled in the dirt. I was in the rafters. I had climbed the maintenance ladder while Hyun-woo entered. I was perched 30 feet above them, straddling a rusty I-beam. I had a clear line of sight on Choi, but Han was shielded by a pillar. If I shot Choi, Han would drop Seola. I had to wait. I had to wait for the mistake. Look at him, Choi sneered, pointing the revolver at Hyun-woo's forehead. He looked down at Seola. Look at your father, little girl. Watch him die. Maybe that will teach you to speak. He cocked the hammer. The click echoed in the vast, silent room. Hyun-woo closed his eyes. I love you, Seola, he whispered. Close your eyes, baby. Don't look. Choi's finger tightened on the trigger. And then, the miracle happened. It started as a whimper, a vibration in the air that shouldn't have been there. Seola squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head violently. The trauma block in her throat, the wall of silence she had built for years to protect herself, shattered under the weight of her love. She opened her mouth. She didn't cry. She roared. Appa. The word ripped through the air. It was raw, tearing, and louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of a soul breaking its chains. Dad. The shock was physical. Hyun-woo's eyes snapped open. Choi flinched. For a fraction of a second, his reptilian brain froze, processing the impossible sound. He turned his head slightly toward the girl. That was the mistake. I didn't use the gun. A gunshot might startle Han into pressing the button. I dropped from the rafters. I didn't land on the floor. I landed on Choi. I descended like a spider, my legs locking around his torso, my momentum driving him into the ground. As we fell, I didn't hesitate. I jammed my combat knife into the soft hollow of his throat, severing the jugular and the vocal cords in one motion. He didn't scream. He just gurgled, blood spraying across the white shirt of the man he was about to execute. I rolled off the dying body, coming up in a crouch. Han screamed, fumbling with the remote. I'll kill her. Bang. The shot didn't come from me. Hyun-woo was still on his knees, but he had snatched a backup pistol from his ankle holster, a move so fast it blurred. The bullet caught Han directly between the eyes. He dropped instantly. The remote skittered across the floor, useless. Silence returned to the slaughterhouse. But it wasn't quiet. Heavy, hacking sobs were tearing through the air. Seola was crying, not the silent tears she had wept for years. Loud, messy, beautiful wailing. Hyun-woo dragged himself across the floor. He ignored his wounds. He ignored the corpse of his rival. He reached the chair. With shaking hands, he untied the ropes. The moment she was free, Seola launched herself into his arms. Appa, Appa. She sobbed, burying her face in his bloody shirt. Hyun-woo buried his face in her neck, weeping openly. I heard you, he choked out. I heard you, my heart. I heard you. I stood a few feet away, wiping the blood from my knife onto my pant leg. My job was done. The threat was neutralized. The principle was secure. The ghost should fade away now. I took a step back, toward the shadows. Hyun-woo looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, wild and fierce. He saw me retreating. "Kyra," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an anchor. He reached out his hand, the hand that wasn't holding his daughter. I looked at his bloody palm. I looked at the little girl who had found her voice to save him. I walked over. I didn't take his hand. I knelt beside them, wrapping my arms around both of them, closing the circuit. Hyun-woo leaned his forehead against mine, and for the first time, amidst the carnage and the rain, the dragon, the princess, and the Black Widow were just a family. The smell of industrial bleach used to be the perfume of my life. It was the scent of survival, of hiding in the corners of a world that didn't want me. Today, the penthouse smells of fresh peonies, expensive gun oil, and the blueberry pancakes Ciola demanded for dinner. The fortress of ice has melted. There are crayons scattered on the Persian rugs and a sniper rifle disassembled on the dining table for cleaning. It is a chaotic, dangerous, beautiful warmth. "Mama," Ciola chirped from her coloring book on the floor. Her voice was clear, musical, and utterly fearless. "That man is sweating. He smells like fear." She pointed a purple marker at the man sitting across from Hyun-woo. Mr. Lee, a potential new partner for the shipping lanes, shifted uncomfortably in his suit. He looked at Ciola, then at me with a sneer of dismissal. "Cute kid," Lee grunted, turning his back to me to address Hyun-woo. "But maybe the women should leave the room, Kim? We have serious numbers to discuss. I don't need a nanny and a mute listening in." The room went dead silent. 6 months ago, Hyun-woo would have ripped this man's throat out for disrespecting me. Today he didn't move. He just leaned back in his leather chair, crossed his legs, and smirked. He knew he didn't need to protect me anymore. I walked over to Mr. Lee. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble. A countdown. I didn't pour him a drink. I leaned down, bringing my lips inches from his ear. "Ciola isn't mute, Mr. Lee," I whispered, my voice silky and lethal. "And I'm not a nanny." I reached out and picked up the heavy crystal ashtray from the table. I weighed it in my hand, letting him see the scars on my knuckles, the calluses from the trigger guard. "I'm the woman who killed Director Choi in a slaughterhouse," I purred. "I'm the woman who cleared this building of 10 mercenaries while wearing a cocktail dress. So, you have 2 choices. You can apologize to my daughter and sign the deal at the rate my husband offered, or I can show you exactly how many ways I can use this ashtray to turn your face into a memory." Lee looked at Hyun-woo for help. Hyun-woo just checked his watch. "I'd listen to her, Lee. She has a terrible temper." Lee turned pale. He mumbled a hasty apology to Ciola, signed the papers with a shaking hand, and practically ran to the elevator. When the doors closed, Hyun-woo stood up. The look in his eyes wasn't just love. It was hunger. It was the look of a king watching his queen conquer. He walked over to me, took the ashtray from my hand, and replaced it with a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a band of black platinum, heavy, indestructible, and lined with crimson rubies. "No more contracts," he said, sliding it onto my finger. "No more debts. You aren't just my wife, Kyra. You are my partner, my equal." I looked at the ring. Then I looked at the city sprawling below us, the lights, the shadows, the empire we rule together. I smiled, and the ghost smiled with me. "I used to clean up the trash," I said, looking out at Seoul. "Now, I own the city."